So Razer recently dropped their Blackwidow V4 Pro 75%, and instead of the usual product briefing, ship a review unit, it came with an interesting challenge this year. They picked a few keyboard creators from all over the world and asked us to customize a pre-release copy of this board. Then all those boards went on a coast-to-coast in-person media tour which culminated in NYC. Razer then brought me down to New York so I could showcase my board in person along with a couple friends and colleagues from the keyboard space. So we're going to take a look at the stock retail version of this board, and then I'll show you my version a little later on. To be 100% transparent, there was a sponsorship package attached to this project that mainly compensated me for being in New York for a couple of days, but did also include this video as well. As always, I'm gonna say whatever I'm gonna say anyway, but I always wanna be fully open about stuff like that. So the board in question is an elevated version of the Blackwidow V4 75 that we looked at last year. I loved that board. It represented a big step for Razer to give us a board that not only sounded and felt really good stock because it leaned into some stuff that we like about custom keyboards, but it also encouraged us to really get inside and customize it. It also had a pretty competitive price point at the time at $199. But a year later, with lots of action in the keyboard space, does this Blackwidow V4 Pro 75 deliver that same feeling? The big move this year is wireless. We now have Razer Hyperspeed and 4K hyperpulling, and we also have Bluetooth with support for 3 devices. A nice thing here is that your board can be charging via the cable, and you can still be on either the 2.4 gigahertz connection, even at 4K, or on the Bluetooth at the same time. The big thing that jumps out visually is this large OLED screen in the top right corner. This is controlled by what they call the command dial on the side, which is up, down, and a click in, so 3 commands per. You then swap options with this mode button on the side, and there is a surprising amount of depth here. By default, you get 6 options that you can cycle through with the mode button to control things like system volume, track selection, OLED brightness, lighting brightness, app switching, and zoom. If you hold the mode button, you go into settings, and then you can add up to 3 more options for scrolling and track jogging, which actually will scrub the playhead in video editing software. You can also deselect options that you don't regularly use, so you have less to scroll through. Keep in mind, this is all running 100% on the hardware so far, so no Razer Synapse running. If you do opt to use Synapse, which is the all-new Synapse 4 for this release, you can also add a custom function slot and assign basically anything you can think of for the up, down, and click on the dial. Also in the setting menu is the ability to select what's displayed on the home screen. You get 6 different animations, 10 different static images, 1 banner style with scrolling text, keyboard info that shows battery life, and emotes just on the hardware. Running Synapse 4 adds an audio visualizer or system parameters like CPU and GPU temp right on your display. Synapse 4 also allows you to upload custom 150 frame animations for all 6 of its animation slots and 10 static image slots. All your uploaded graphics stay flashed to the keyboard memory and travel with the board, with or without Synapse. If you do opt to use it, it also helps you navigate, configure, and customize everything I just showed you with an interface that's a lot easier to navigate. You also have access to all the lighting modes, dimming, and power saving settings. That's a lot to cover for what looks like a simple aesthetic add-on, but they went really deep with this thing. Back on the board itself, it's a lot of what we saw on the previous version, but there's obviously some updates. Still got an aluminum top plate, plastic lower with 2-stage flip-down feet. We've got 2 layers of sound dampening, one in the lower case and one between the plate and the PCB. We still have gasket mount here with pour-on gaskets, still using the FR4 plate, which gives a much better sound and feel than the steel plates you find on most retail gaming boards. The FR4 this time around is white to really make the RGB pop, and it definitely does. If you're a fan of RGB, there is loads of it on this board, including the lower side lights for a little underglow, and this board gets seriously bright. We still got the Razer Orange Tactile Gen 3 switches, so these do have a noticeable bump in the travel versus a linear switch. You might have seen some reports of these switches double clicking on the board that was released last year, but I did confirm with Razer that they caught that pretty early on. They replaced all those boards, and they even sent out replacement switches to end users who were affected by that. I still stand by the switch design. They're smooth, they're factory lubed, they're really stable, and of course, if you're not crazy about them, you can swap them out, as this board is hot swap. It has support for both 3 and 5-pin switches, and it has north-facing LEDs. I never mind seeing this on a gaming board because backlit keycaps are still a really big requested feature outside the world of custom keyboards, and north-facing LEDs do a much better job with that. We also still have the factory tape mod on the rear of the PCB, which was wild to see in the original. They did move to double-shot PBT caps this time around. These have more texture than the double-shot ABS they used in the original. These will wear longer without shine, but they sound sharper and less premium to me than the ABS version. We'll hear them both side by side in just a second. You can make your own call on that. The standard Blackwidow V4 75 comes with plate mount stabs and can be upgraded to screw-in PCB mount stabs. This Pro version comes with screw-in stabs standard, but can be replaced with most any PCB or plate mount stabilizers, and these are factory lubed. These are just okay. The spacebar on my retail copy has quite a bit of rattle, and that PBT material on the keycap has a tendency to really amplify that. Let's hit that spacebar with a little lube and see what's up. I think it comes down purely to the keycap material, but I do prefer the sound of the original over this Pro. Luckily, they've made it really easy to customize this board. 8 standard Phillips head screws get you in, and the whole top plate just lifts right off. The ribbon cables are really well laid out inside, and all the clips are easy to access with just your fingernail. This part they did really right. So for my custom version, the chassis itself was sent off to get painted by my guy Nacho Customs, and he did like a blue to purple color flip paint job that came out really nice. Keep in mind, this board has already been on a coast-to-coast tour and had tons of hands on it before I finally got it back to the studio to shoot it. Switches, I went with my own BadSeed Tactile V2s. These are hand lubed. I get asked about the next release for these a lot. It's gonna be a while. We're still weighing our options and looking at a couple different manufacturers for the next run. Because these are long pole switches, I went with some TX long pole stabs as well to help keep the longer keys balanced. On the rear, I replaced that factory tape mod layer with the standard tried and true painter's tape layer because it creates a slightly lower tone that really complements the switches. For the keycaps, half of this board is done in GMK phosphorus and the other half on the bias is done in glacier dark translucent caps from Angry Meow. A big reason for this choice is that I knew we'd be showing this board to a lot of different media types. Some had no idea that people even customize keyboards. A lot of the magic for custom keyboards happens below the keycaps, so I wanted to include something that gave a little sneak peek at the internals under those caps. The artisan here is the Honeypot 1U bronze keycap from NZ Caps, easily my favorite artisan makers. Because the internals and the chassis itself were done in 2 different locations, I actually didn't get to see the fully completed board until I arrived in New York to meet it. If I had to do it over, I probably would have gone with a black cap with cyan legends as opposed to gray, so it pops harder against the paint, but Nacho still killed this thing, and I'm really stoked with how it all came together. Okay, so the elephant in the room for this board is the price. This comes in at $299.99 US, and it's not like this Pro version misses anything. It ticks every box you'd want to see in a keyboard. It's just that the version of this board that came out last year created a real moment when it launched. That board sounded nice enough to raise eyebrows right out of the box. The price point of $199 felt very competitive, and the decisions they made to lean into the world of customs felt like a really bold choice at the time. Only the ROG Azoth from Asus had really attempted something like that at that point. Even now, the Azoth is still the biggest direct competitor to this board. The main things the Blackwidow V4 Pro has over it are 4K polling on the wireless versus 1000 Hz on the Azoth, FR4 plate, screw-in stabs standard, the side lights, the deep functionality and customization of the OLED screen. Both boards have PBT caps, but the Azoth offers a choice of linear or tactile switches, and it's available in white. You get an included wrist rest here as opposed to the switch lube kit on the Azoth, and here you're working with the leaner Synapse 4 versus the full-fat version of Armory Crate on the Azoth. For some people, that's a toss-up. For me, I avoid Armory Crate whenever I can. The RGB can also get much brighter on the Blackwidow than the Azoth, but all that RGB comes at the cost of battery life. Out of the box, the Blackwidow is rated for 21 hours. That's 50% RGB brightness, the 9-zone underglow on both sides, the OLED screen running at 75% brightness, and 1000 Hz polling. If you're gonna turn up the RGB brightness, that's gonna cost you. If you're gonna run 4K polling, that's really gonna cost you, and we were only at 21 hours to begin with. This board in Synapse 4 doesn't currently have a global mode like the Viper V3 Pro mouse to switch in and out of 4K depending on whether you're in a game or on the desktop. But you can link specific games and build a custom profile so you're only running 4K in certain titles and saving the battery the rest of the time. You can also build out different memory profiles that save to the keyboard that you can switch to manually with different brightness settings and polling rates to help better manage it. So there is a lot of flexibility in how you can balance the battery versus the looks and performance. You can just toggle through these profiles with function and all. Pressing function at any time reveals your current battery life on the screen, and there's an optional battery indicator LED on top of the hyper polling dongle. They've also included a power saving mode by just holding function and pressing escape that turns off all the lighting, the display, and limits the board to 1000 Hz polling, and that gives you up to 2100 hours in idle state. Anybody who's ever used an Azoth will tell you that that board has freakishly long battery life. That's a side effect of that board being locked into lower brightness on the LEDs and being locked at 1000 Hz polling. But $300 here just doesn't feel like it to me. I would like this better even at $249. Even then, running the brightness all the way up, the OLED screen all the way bright, and the 4K polling impacts the battery life so hard, I would probably just run this wired 90% of the time. Even 21 hours running at 1000 Hz feels pretty light, so you'd have to knock the brightness down even further to make the wireless feel viable. At that point, outside of the screen, there's not what I would say is enough here to warrant this purchase over the original Blackwidow V475. It's not even a matter of it being standard switches instead of Hall Effect. Hall Effect definitely has a place in the sweaty competitive FPS or rhythm game scene and like the 6 or 8 games that really benefit from it, but there's still a perfectly viable addressable market for traditional mechanical keyboards outside of that. If you're not into shooters or rhythm games, you're generally going to get better sound and feel out of a standard mechanical keyboard. And we're not really at the point yet where we're seeing trusted options for both Hall effect and wireless in the same board. Even then, the sound and feel of this board just doesn't hit for me like the original version did. It's still a thing where I love to see brands lean more into the world of customs and offer this kind of flexibility, but the stock experience just isn't as strong for me this time around. And by the time you get done with add-ons on this board, this can become a very expensive project. I'm still a big believer in the original Blackwidow V4 75, but I don't think this Pro version lives up to its price.